going to do a short piece today on lenses, and specifically what we're going to be looking at is prime and zoom lenses and the difference between the two and the advantages of both. The video is designed for people that are looking potentially to move away from their kit lens, looking at having more creative options and seeing what's going to work best for their particular scenario. And I tell you right away, cut to the chase, is that there really is no such thing as a perfect lens. It's only what works best for you in the scenarios that you shoot in. So it's hopefully going to give you an idea of, you know, the advantages and disadvantages of both, and just give you a little bit more information, make you a little bit more informed to make that decision of potentially buying more lenses down the road for you. And we're specifically going to be looking mainly aimed at for video use, although it's applicable to photography as well. And it will be mainly talking about the Canon side of things. So we'll be looking at a few lenses, mainly of which are of a Canon brand. So we'll jump right into looking at the prime lenses first. And a prime lens, well, what's a prime? If you don't know, it's a fixed focal length lens. So it has a single focal length. Now, one of the main things you'll hear people say is that the image quality of prime lenses is better than zooms, and generally on the whole that pretty much holds true. There are a few zoom lenses that will rival prime quality, and the reason that prime lenses are generally have a higher image quality than a zoom lens is that there's less glass, less elements in there, so there's less of literally less things for light to travel through, less things to distort it, to soften the image, to degrade it, and that's why we associate primes with really good image quality. Now, the other main benefit of primes, as you'll hear people say, is that they're very fast. Now, what does that necessarily mean? Well, a fast lens is one that has a very wide maximum aperture, and prime lenses typically, you know, you will see especially in the smaller focal lengths, very fast maximum apertures all the way down to 1, 1.2, 1.4. And if we have a look at one here, for example, we have so this is a Canon 24 1.4 L series lens. It's actually the Mark II lens. And the 1.4 tells you that it's got a maximum aperture of 1.4. So that lets in a very large amount of light. Now, what's the benefit of that for video use? Well, if you're shooting video, generally we keep our shutter speed pretty much constant. So if we're shooting, say, 25 frames a second, we'll have a shutter speed of 1/50th. So if we're in dark conditions, we've got two options to change our exposure to let more light in. We can bump up our ISO, and you probably all know that the main disadvantage of doing that is as you go higher and higher, you're introducing more noise and more grain, the image degrades. The other option is to open up the aperture and let more light in, and obviously with a lens of 1.4 you can open that up really wide and let in lots and lots of light. The disadvantage or advantage to this is that it gives you a shallow depth of field. Now, that might be great because that's what you want to go for. You want to isolate your subject, you want to creatively blur out the background, you know, throw those lights out of focus, get that really lovely kind of bokeh that's associated with cinematic looking footage. That's great if you can keep what you're trying to shoot in focus, and having a very wide aperture means that your depth of field, so the area of the image that's in focus, gets extremely narrow, and you know, you can literally be talking about millimeters. So trying to nail focus can be very difficult. Now, if you're on a tripod and it's a static shot, that's not too much of a problem, but if you're shooting a live event moving around, then that poses a lot of challenges. So, you know, having a fast aperture, great, it gives you that creative option, but not necessarily always going to make your life really easy. So the main advantages of the prime lens is that image quality, the very wide maximum aperture, giving you that fast lens, allowing you to shoot in low light conditions without introducing too much noise. Another one that's probably associated is they're quite light. Like I said, there's typically less glass in a prime lens, so therefore they tend to be lighter. But as you'll see, if we have a look at this, which is the Canon 24, which we just looked at a minute ago, to take the lens cap and lens hood off, it's actually, you know, quite a chunky lens. And if we compare that to, say, the 24 to 105, which is a zoom lens, well, you know, they're pretty much the same size. So not always smaller and lighter. And actually, I think the 24 is slightly heavier than the 24 or 105. So that brings us nicely onto zoom lenses. Let me just pop the 24mm down. So 24 105, and as the name would suggest, it's 24mm at the wide length, and it goes all the way out to 105mm at the telephoto length. Maximum aperture is 4 on this, so it's an f4 lens, and that's another thing that we tend not necessarily to see with zoom lenses, is that they won't always have a constant aperture. You might have, say, a lens that is 3.5 to 5.6, and what that means is that it's got a maximum aperture of 3.5 at the wide end and a maximum aperture of 5.6 at the telephoto lens. Now for video work, this introduces a lot of challenges, because you can maybe zoom in because I want to get a type of composition, but that will throw out your exposure because the aperture will change and will close up, letting less light in, which means your image is darker, which means you're going to have to change your ISO. So one thing I can highly recommend is constant aperture zoom lenses for video work, and this one, f4 across the zoom range. Now the main benefit of a zoom lens is that it allows you to take, as we saw, one lens and cover all those focal lengths. So if you're doing live events, you're run and gunning, you're one-man band, or, you know, very small crew, having 2 or 3 zoom lenses can give you all the options, all the focal lengths, whereas you might need 6 or 7 primes. The other benefit is that if you've only got, say, 2 zoom lenses, well, then you've only got 2 lenses to change, which means you can operate quicker, you can change a lens quicker. You could even have 2 bodies with 1 lens on each, which means, you know, it's just a matter of pulling that other camera out, and, you know, as long as all your picture settings are right, you're good to go. Whereas with primes, it takes time. You tend to find that primes are used on larger scale productions where you've got more crew, you've got more time, more flexibility. If you've got time to set up the shot, get your camera placed exactly where you want it, block the scene, then a prime is going to be great for that. If you don't have that luxury, then generally a zoom is going to be a little bit more convenient. So that's really the crux of it. It's that convenience, but you're obviously sacrificing the full options of you know, maximum wide apertures that you only get with primes. Now there are 1 or 2 zooms that actually do go almost as wide as primes. There is, I think there's a lens that Sigma do, which is an 18 to 35, which is actually 1.8, but that will only work on crop sensor cameras, so that won't work on your full frame cameras like your Canon 5D or your Nikon D600, D800, the Canon 6D, and some of the high-end, the 1DX, Canon 1 series. So the maximum aperture you'll get on zoom lenses for those cameras is 2.8, and Canon and actually Nikon both make fantastic lenses that do that. So you've got your 24 to 70 2.8, and then your 70 to 200 2.8. And with those 2 lenses, you can cover 24mm all the way up to 200 at a constant 2.8 aperture. So it allows you a really fast, gives you really fast lenses, which means letting lots of light, means you're not going to have to bump up your ISO. Those lenses, both the Canon and Nikon varieties, are renowned for their image quality as well, so give fantastic looking, almost prime-like images. Now they do come at a cost. I think you're looking at, did have the figures down, about £3,800 for both of them. So I think the 70-200 runs about £2,000 English, and the 24 to 70 2.8 to Mark II lens is about £1,800. But you get 2 fantastic lenses which will cover you for pretty much everything in those focal lengths. If you wanted to cover yourself in primes, you'd be looking at having a potentially a 24mm, a 35mm, a 50mm, an 85, a 100, a 135, and a 200. So like 6 or 7 lenses, and you know, you're going to be forever changing those. A lot of people say, you know, well, use primes and use your feet, which is, yeah, absolutely true. You should be moving around. You should be getting closer for your composition if you need to be. But if you're shooting a live event, a wedding, for instance, you know, you might be limited to the back of a venue, which means you literally can't get any closer. So having primes in that sort of scenario is going to make your life a lot more difficult. So as we've kind of come round to it, you know, there is no perfect lens. It's only what works best for you in your particular scenario. Hopefully that gives you a little bit more idea about the advantages and disadvantages of both. I certainly would recommend you know, having some of both. I certainly do. I've got a range of zoom lenses, a range of prime lenses. You know, pretty much, you know, photography 101, video making 101 recommends, you know, get a 50mm prime, and really there's no excuse. I mean, I actually have got a few. One of my favorite ones is a Nikon here. This is an old kind of vintage 70s Nikon lens, which is fully manual, so manual focus ring and an old manual aperture ring, which kind of clicks nicely. That goes down to f2. That was £40 off eBay. You get an adapter ring. You can put that on your modern SLR, my Canon DSLR, no problem. So having a prime lens, you know, in your bag is really not kind of prohibitively expensive. You know, you can get cheap, good ones, and like I say, because there's less glass, less elements in them, even the cheaper ones give really good image quality. I mean, a Canon 51.8, which runs about 60, 70 English pounds, I don't know, that's about $100. You know, that's a fast lens with image quality that almost rivals the Canon 51.4 and the 51.2, which are, you know, 4 and 10 times the price respectively. So there are cheap prime options. Generally, zooms which are cheap aren't very good. You're not going to find a constant aperture. You're not going to get particularly good image quality out of them. And they're not bad. It all depends on what you're using them for. So it's all comparable. So that pretty much sums it up. I hope this has been useful, and hopefully you're feeling a little bit more informed about the difference between primes and zooms, and what potentially may work well for you. If you like it, you know, feel free to leave a comment, subscribe, like the video, and if you do have any questions, please either drop me a comment below or find me on Twitter. Thanks very much.